He fought the stars for her love, but she had already chosen someone else. The silence of space was broken by the soundless flash of war. Explosions lit the dark like brief suns, burning and fading in seconds. Human ships moved between the wreckage of alien fleets, their hulls scarred but still holding. At the center of this storm was one soldier, a man whose eyes held no fear of the endless void. He did not fight for medals nor for history. He fought for something smaller, something far more dangerous than even the sharpest blade of war. He fought for her. Every order he gave, every shot he fired carried her name in his heart. When others thought only of survival, he thought of the moments he might share if he returned alive. The galaxy could call him a soldier, a hero, even a monster, but deep inside he was simply a man in love. That love was fire and burden both. It gave him courage when the alien cannons thundered, but it chained him to a dream that perhaps was never his to hold. The alien fleet ahead was massive. Towering vessels with silver hulls and sharp wings of steel moved like predators in the black. Their numbers were endless, and yet humanity had learned to fight them with claws sharper than steel. Humanity fought with desperation. Humanity fought with memory. Humanity fought with rage, and he was the sharpest edge among them. The man who led others into the fire with no hesitation. He knew if he fell, 1,000 others might follow. But he also knew if he lived, she might look at him differently. His ship shook as plasma fire cut across the shield. Lights flickered and warning signs screamed across the dashboard. He held the controls with steady hands, guiding the vessel through debris and enemy fire. His crew looked to him for calm. He gave it to them, not because he felt calm, but because he could not afford to show weakness. Somewhere beyond the fire, beyond the endless battlefield, her face lingered in his thoughts. The way she once smiled at him, soft and gentle, was brighter than the fire of stars. He believed it still belonged to him, that his survival was the bridge that would lead him back to her arms. But the truth was far colder. She had already made her choice long before this battle began. She had chosen another. She had walked a different path, leaving him behind even as he carried her ghost into war. Yet he did not know, not fully. He fought on in ignorance, believing that love was waiting for him at the end of the road of blood. A blast tore across the side of the ship. The sound was like thunder inside the hull, making the crew scream and grab for safety. He did not flinch. He guided the ship lower, letting the blast slide across the shields instead of breaking them. His skill saved them. His fire destroyed the enemy vessel that had dared to strike. Around him, men and women cheered, their fear broken by his strength. They called his name. They called him leader, protector, shield of earth. He heard them, but he did not answer. He whispered only her name under his breath, as if the stars themselves could carry it across the dark. The galaxy had no mercy. It demanded more blood each day, more sacrifice, more souls fed into its furnace. Humanity answered that demand with iron and fire, and with hearts that refused to break. Among those hearts, his burned the brightest. He would fight as long as breath remained in his chest. He would fight as long as her memory kept him alive. Yet what is the weight of memory when reality has already erased it? He was giving his life for something that was no longer his. As the ship dove into another cluster of enemy fighters, he saw them scatter before his fire. The aliens feared the humans, but more than fear, they felt confusion. No matter how many battles were fought, no matter how many losses humanity suffered, these fragile creatures from Earth refused to surrender. They kept rising even when hope was gone. They kept fighting even when their homes burned. They fought with something the aliens could not understand. They fought with love, and love was what carried him deeper into the storm. He closed his eyes for one breath and he saw her again. He saw the shape of her hand, the curve of her smile, the way she once looked at him when the war was far away. He believed in that memory more than the stars. It was the reason his heart still beat. It was the reason his ship had not yet been destroyed. But destiny is cruel. Love can be a shield, but it can also be a chain. While he believed she waited, she was already gone, her heart given to someone else. The battle burned on. Fires raged across the stars, and his name became another roar in the storm. He did not yet know the truth, but the truth waited for him, colder than any alien weapon. He was ready to fight the whole galaxy, ready to burn every star if it meant returning to her. But the cruelest war is not fought with ships or guns. It is fought with silence, with the knowledge that the one you love has already chosen another. And as his ship cut through the dark, leading humanity into another victory, his fate was sealed. He would survive this battle, he would return, but he would not find the love he fought for. He would find the truth, and the truth would break him more than any war ever could. The battlefield drifted into silence after the last of the alien vessels burst into fragments. Human ships floated in broken lines, their engines bleeding fire, their shields dim with exhaustion. Yet even in such ruin, the soldiers of Earth refused to bow. They repaired, they gathered the wounded, and they prepared again. For war in the galaxy never ended. It came in waves, endless and sharp, like a tide that drowned every corner of space. And within that tide hid enemies that no one could yet see. He sat in the command chair, eyes locked on the fading light of the battlefield. His face was calm, but inside his chest his heart pounded with a storm. He thought not of victory. He thought of her. Somewhere, far from this floating graveyard, she walked in peace. He imagined her safe, untouched by fire, waiting for his return. That image gave him strength. It gave him the power to smile at his crew and tell them that the worst was over. But the stars whispered a different truth. The worst was not over. The enemy was not yet gone. Reports arrived from the scouts, their voices sharp with fear. Shadows moved beyond the wreckage, ships hidden in the black, their signals faint and distorted. These were not the fleets they had fought. These were hunters, unseen and patient. They waited for the humans to breathe, to believe they were safe before striking again. The alien empire had learned from its losses. It no longer rushed into the fire. It watched. It adapted. It hid. He studied the reports in silence. Around him, his officers argued. Some said they should retreat, return to safer ground. Others said they should push forward before the enemy struck again. But he said nothing. He knew the truth better than any of them. This war was not one battle. It was not even one lifetime. It was a chain that stretched through time, and humanity was caught in its links. To retreat meant weakness. To rush forward meant death. There was no right choice. There was only survival. And yet for him, survival had only one meaning. To live was to see her again. To breathe was to carry her memory back to her side. So he chose not as a soldier, not as a leader, but as a man in love. He ordered the fleet to move forward. He told them the shadows ahead were weak, nothing more than scattered remnants. His voice was strong, and the crew believed him. They needed his certainty more than they needed truth. The fleet advanced, their engines glowing against the black. For a time there was quiet. The stars seemed calm, their silence almost beautiful. Then the darkness split open. From every side, the hidden enemy appeared. Sleek ships with dark metal hulls emerged from shadow, their weapons glowing with alien fire. They had been waiting, and now they struck with fury. The first blasts tore through 2 human ships. Fire consumed them, scattering pieces of men and steel into the void. The screams echoed through the comms, but he did not flinch. He ordered return fire. Cannons roared. Missiles streaked. The stars became fire once again. He stood unshaken, even as the enemy closed in from every side. For in his mind, he was not fighting for Earth or even for the survival of his people. He was fighting for her. Every enemy destroyed was another step closer to the life he dreamed with her. But the truth moved closer too, unseen like the enemy. She was not waiting. Her heart belonged to another. While he burned the stars with his devotion, she gave her smile to someone else. She built her life away from the war, away from the man who carried her name into every battle. He could not see it yet, but the silence of her absence was heavier than all the ships of the enemy. The crew shouted as another blast tore through the shields. Sparks flew across the deck. One man fell screaming as fire licked his arm. Others rushed to help him, their fear breaking into chaos. He rose from his chair, his voice cutting through the storm. He told them they would not die here. He told them they were stronger than fear. And they believed him because they had no choice. Hope was the only weapon left when all others failed. The battle stretched into hours. Ships on both sides fell. The humans fought with every drop of strength left in their veins. The enemy fought with precision, never wasting a single shot. Slowly, painfully, the tide turned. The humans bled, but they did not break. His ship pushed through the fire, tearing holes into the enemy lines. When his weapons failed, he rammed the ship forward, crushing smaller vessels beneath its weight. His eyes burned with fury, but in his heart was only her. Every move, every strike was for her. When at last the enemy pulled back, retreating into the shadows once more, the human fleet was in ruins. Half the ships were gone, their crews lost to the void. The survivors floated in silence, their fuel low, their spirits weaker than ever before. Yet among them he stood tall, his figure lit by the dim glow of the fading stars. To his crew he was strength. To his people he was hope. But to himself he was nothing more than a man clinging to love. He did not know that love had already slipped from his grasp. He did not know that the war he fought was for a ghost, an echo of something that no longer existed. The enemy outside was fierce, but the enemy inside was far crueler. The unseen enemy was not only the alien ships. It was the truth waiting in silence, ready to strike when he least expected it. And as the fleet gathered what little strength remained, he swore that he would not stop. He would fight again, and again, until the stars themselves burned out, because to stop meant to admit that she was gone. To stop meant to face a truth he could not bear. And so he chose to fight, not knowing that the enemy within was already winning. The wreckage of battle floated behind the human fleet like a graveyard of steel and silence. Fires burned inside shattered hulls, their light fading slowly into the endless dark. For many it was a night of mourning. For him it was another step forward. Another wound on his heart that he carried in silence. He did not weep for the dead. He had no time to. He wept for something else, something far more fragile than ships or soldiers. He wept for her, though no one could see it. The fleet limped into orbit around a ruined moon. The surface was cracked with scars of old wars, its craters glowing faintly from minerals exposed long ago. Here they would repair what they could, though little remained to repair with. Supplies were low. Energy cells were nearly empty. Many of the crew whispered that perhaps it was the end, but he stood among them, tall and unbroken, his presence enough to quiet their fear. He told them that hope was never lost. He told them humanity had no end, and though they doubted in their hearts, they believed his voice. But deep inside, his voice belonged to her. Every word he spoke to them, he imagined he spoke to her. Every vow of strength, every promise of survival, was a message carried across the stars, meant only for her ears. He lived inside a story that only he believed. And belief can make men rise where others fall, but belief can also blind them to the truth. A call came from the higher command. The next mission was not a request. It was an order. An alien fortress lay deep inside hostile space, its engines burning bright, its weapons aimed at human colonies. To strike it meant certain death. To avoid it meant those colonies would fall. There was no path that led to peace, only sacrifice. When he heard the order, his officers waited for him to argue. They waited for him to refuse. But he did not. He accepted without hesitation. He told them they would go. He told them they would not falter. He told them they would not only survive but triumph. And his eyes shone with fire, though the fire came not from duty. It came from love. He thought if he broke that fortress, if he stood among the wreckage as a victor, she would know his worth. She would see him not as a soldier lost in war, but as the man who fought the stars themselves for her. The journey to the fortress was long, marked by silence, broken only by the hum of tired engines. The crew worked in shadows, patching broken walls, stitching wires, and whispering prayers they dared not say aloud. He walked among them, calm and steady, a ghost of courage. Yet when he was alone, he allowed himself to breathe differently. Alone in the dark of his quarters, he stared at the small photograph he carried, her image captured in a moment of laughter that seemed older than time itself. He pressed it to his chest as if it could beat like a second heart. He whispered to it promises of return, of victory, of a love that could never die. He believed those promises even as the universe prepared to break them. The fortress appeared at last, a giant in the dark, its walls glowing with rivers of energy. It was a beast, and they were but fragile hunters, but humanity had never cared for odds. Humanity fought not because it was stronger, but because it refused to be weak. He gave the order, and the ships roared forward. The first blasts struck before they could reach striking range. Bright lances of alien fire pierced the void, tearing two ships apart instantly. The cries of the dying filled the comms. The rest pressed forward. He did not falter. He guided his ship straight into the storm, weaving through explosions, firing every weapon he had. His crew followed because they trusted him. They trusted because he had never broken, but he knew he fought not as their commander, not even as their protector. He fought as a man who wanted to prove to one heart that his own still burned. Hours of fire followed. Every strike pushed them closer. Every loss bled them further. One by one, his fleet fell until only fragments remained. Yet through it all, his ship endured. He refused to fall. He refused to surrender. At last, they reached the fortress. He gave the order. and their weapons tore into its walls. Fire consumed the giant. It screamed as its engines exploded, light flooding the black like a false dawn. The fortress was broken. The mission was complete. His name would be carved into the records of humanity as the man who led the impossible. His crew wept with relief. They shouted his name. They called him hero, but he did not hear them. He heard only the silence of her absence. For somewhere far away she smiled at another. Somewhere she gave her heart to someone else. She did not wait for him. She did not even know he was fighting for her. While he bled and burned among the stars, she lived in another world, untouched by his sacrifice. He stood alone in the wreckage of victory, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The galaxy thought he fought for survival. His people thought he fought for them. But the truth was simpler and far more cruel. He fought for her and she was already gone, and yet he would never stop. For love is not always wise, nor is it always kind. Sometimes it is a fire that refuses to die, even when nothing remains to burn. His choice of the heart was made long ago, and he could not undo it. He would fight again, and again, for a love that no longer belonged to him, and in that choice his fate was sealed. For the cruelest battlefield is not among the stars, but within the heart itself. The wreckage of the fortress still drifted behind them when the fleet returned to safer ground. The humans had won, but victory felt like ashes. Too many ships were gone, too many names lost forever to the silence of space. The survivors wore hollow eyes, their voices quiet, their hands shaking when no one was watching. And at the center of them all stood the man who had led them through fire. To them he was more than flesh. He was iron carved out of will and duty. Yet inside him was no iron. Inside him was only a heart beating for one reason, a heart that believed it had something waiting beyond the smoke of war. When he returned to the colony, he carried that heart proudly. The air was different here, full of life and voices instead of death and silence. Children ran through the streets, traders shouted, lights glowed from windows. For a brief moment he allowed himself to believe he could belong here again, that the darkness of space could be shut away. He walked with the photograph hidden in his pocket, his steps heavy with both hope and fear. He told himself she would smile when she saw him, that her eyes would soften as they once did. He told himself love could wait across years of blood, but the colony whispered the truth before she did. Whispers carried faster than any ship, and they reached him before he reached her. He heard her name spoken with another, not in pity but in joy. He heard that she laughed with him, walked with him, stood at his side as though there had never been another. At first he refused to believe. His heart built walls against the sound, telling him it was lies, telling him it could not be true. But hearts can only lie for so long before truth cuts through. When at last he saw her, it was not as he dreamed. She stood at a balcony, the light of the colony's towers falling across her face. She was as beautiful as the memory he had carried. But that beauty no longer belonged to him. Another stood beside her, close enough that their hands brushed. She turned, and her smile was soft, but it was not for him. It had never been for him. For a long moment he could not breathe. The stars, the fire, the endless nights of blood, all of it pressed down on him at once. He had carried her face through the darkness, he had survived where others fell. He had fought until his body broke only for this, only to see her heart resting in another's hands. His crew called him hero, his people called him savior, but in this moment he was nothing. He was a man left outside his own dream. She did not avoid him. She did not turn away. She stepped forward, her voice gentle, her eyes filled with kindness but not love. She told him she was proud of him, that his courage had saved so many lives, that his name would never be forgotten. But the words were like knives. She spoke to him as one speaks to a brother, not as one speaks to a love. She spoke with respect, not devotion, and in her every word was the truth he had refused to see. She had already chosen. He stood silent, his hands trembling at his sides. He wanted to scream, to demand why, to ask if she knew what he had given for her, but he said nothing. The soldier inside him held the man down. He did not beg. He did not fight. He only listened. And when she turned back to the other man, his heart broke so quietly that no one else could hear it. That night he walked alone through the colony streets. Lights glowed above him. Laughter echoed around him, but he felt none of it. He walked as if through a dream, each step heavier than the last. He thought of every battle, every wound, every moment where death had nearly claimed him. He thought of the times he whispered her name in the dark, believing it gave him strength. Now he saw the truth. That strength was built on emptiness. That love had been only a shadow, already gone before he even reached for it. But what is a man without purpose? He could not surrender to despair. He could not fall, for too many still looked to him. The colony cheered his name. Children ran to him with flowers, elders bowed in thanks. To them he was hope itself. To them his life was proof that humanity could endure. And so he smiled. He smiled as though his heart had not just been shattered. He smiled because that was what they needed. Yet when he returned to his quarters, when the doors closed and the silence fell, he allowed the mask to slip. He sat alone, staring at the photograph he once carried like a shield. Now it mocked him, the frozen laughter of a woman who was never his. He crushed it in his fist, but even then he could not throw it away. He pressed it to his chest, and the pain was sharper than any blade. He told himself he would keep fighting, but not for her anymore. He told himself he would fight for humanity, for the children who ran free in the streets, for the colonies that burned under alien fire. Yet deep inside he knew the truth. He would always fight for her, even if she never looked at him again. Even if her love belonged to someone else, his heart could not change. Love does not obey orders. It does not surrender. It clings to life even when nothing is left to hold. And so his war continued. Not against the aliens, not against the endless fleets that burned the stars, but against himself, against the emptiness inside that no victory could ever fill, against the truth that he had given everything for love and love had turned its face away. The days after the truth felt heavier than the longest battles. He moved among the colony like a shadow wrapped in armor, every step steady, every word calm. To the people he was unshaken. To the soldiers he was unbreakable. To the children who followed him through the streets, he was a hero. But when the lights dimmed and the doors closed behind him, he was nothing but a man with a hollow chest. The truth echoed inside him louder than any alien cannon. She had chosen another. He told himself that it no longer mattered. He told himself that her love was never his to claim, that perhaps he had always been a fool to believe the stars could carry him back to her. But even as he said these things to himself, he knew they were lies. Love does not vanish with truth. Love lingers, clings, and refuses to die. He still carried her face in every dream, her name in every breath. And no matter how far he tried to push it away, it remained, a scar carved too deep to heal. The war called again before he had time to mend. The aliens had not retreated. They gathered stronger fleets, sharper weapons, darker strategies. Their goal was simple, the destruction of humanity. And so once again the call came for him to lead. Others begged for rest, but not him. He stood without hesitation, perhaps because war was all he had left, perhaps because in war he could hide from the silence of his broken heart. He gathered the fleet, what little remained of it. Ships patched together from wreckage, engines that wheezed instead of roared, soldiers too young to carry such heavy burdens. Yet when they looked at him, their eyes held fire. They saw him not as a man, but as the living spirit of Earth. They believed that as long as he stood, humanity could never fall.
He accepted that weight not because he wanted it, but because someone had to.
And if not him, then who? The fleet moved into the dark once more. The alien armadas met them with fury, endless walls of steel and light stretching across the void. To anyone else it looked like certain death. To him it looked like one more chance. Not for her, not anymore, but for something larger, for the legacy of humanity itself. The battle began, and the stars burned like fire. His ship tore through the enemy lines, every blast shaking the hull, every explosion rattling the crew. Still, he stood tall, guiding them forward. The aliens fought with cold precision, but humans fought with desperation. Humans fought with something no weapon could measure. They fought with memory, with hope, with love. Even when love was lost, hours became days. The battle stretched into something beyond time. Both sides bled, both sides burned, yet still they fought. His name was spoken in every corner of the fleet, his voice the thread that held them together. He told them they were not fighting only for survival. They were fighting to prove that humanity could never be erased. They were fighting for children unborn, for songs unwritten, for dreams yet to come, and they believed him because they had no choice but to believe. At the heart of the battle, when his ship was nearly broken, he closed his eyes. He thought of her again, but not as he once did. Not as a dream he would return to, not as a love that might save him. He thought of her as a memory a reminder that love itself gave humans the power to stand when all else failed. She was gone, but the fire she left in him was not, and that fire now belonged to something greater. With one final strike, his ship rammed into the enemy flagship. The explosion lit the void like a new star, tearing the alien fleet apart. The shockwave carried across the battlefield, scattering their enemies, forcing them to retreat. The cost was unbearable, but the victory undeniable. Humanity survived another day. When the silence returned, only fragments of the fleet remained. His ship was gone, consumed in fire. The crew whispered that he too was gone, lost to the void. But some believed differently. Some said he lived, drifting between the stars, a spirit of war and love that could never die. His story became more than history. It became legend. The colony mourned, but they also celebrated. Children spoke his name in stories. Soldiers carved it into steel. Elders told it with trembling voices. He had fought the stars for love, but in the end he gave that fight to all of humanity. His heart had broken, but from that broken heart grew a fire that lit the path for everyone else. And somewhere she heard the stories too. Perhaps she wept, perhaps she smiled, perhaps she felt nothing at all. It no longer mattered. For his love was never meant to be returned. It was meant to become something larger than himself. The galaxy would remember him not as a man who lost in love, but as a man who gave everything so humanity would never lose in war. And in that his legacy was written forever.